And good evening, LBE community, family, supporters, accomplices. This is indeed going to be an exciting evening. We haven't had a barbershop talk in a long time, and this is when we bring um, some of our very cherished minds in the community to come in and share how they feel about what we consider to be hot topics. And so this evening's hot topic is the fact that last month, which was Black History Month, um, at the Flagstaff City Council meeting, uh, one or maybe more community members uh, requested that the council consider creating an American White Heritage History Month. Um, the LBE project, some of us thought that that was a bit, first of all, disrespectful to make that suggestion during Black History Month, the 1 month, and this year we had 29 days, and so the 29 days we wanted to just focus on our accomplishments as people of African descent and our many contributions to these United States of America. And so some are of the opinion that, and including myself, I'm not afraid to say that I think uh, white, American White Heritage History Month could possibly be 365 days a year. Would it be true? Not really, but considering the history of America and how it has presented and taught its history, one would be inclined to agree with that. I'm excited that we have two awesome individuals that I consider to be brothers, friends, and colleagues in the barbershop. And as a woman, this is totally a space this evening for our men. And I am going to go in the backgrounds. Thank you, gentlemen, for letting me be in the barbershop for just a little while. And I'm going to leave you to it to introduce yourselves and to free your souls on how you're feeling about this American White Heritage History Month celebration suggestion. Thank you.
No problem.
Mhm.
Well, you want to go first, Martin?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Martin Tees. I work at Northern Arizona University um, in the Meaningful Engagement Network. And I am, can you hear me, Moreno?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. I was just making sure I wasn't muted. I work at Northern Arizona University. I'm an alum of the university. I'm a native of Arizona from Phoenix on South, grew up on South Mountain. I go by he, him, and his pronouns. I work on a Men of Color initiative, trying to get students from their first day on campus all the way to graduation. And I'm also an Inclusion and Diversity Fellow, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. My name is Dr. Jose G. Moreno. I am the current director of Ethnic Studies program here at NAU and also associate teaching professor of ethnic studies. I've been here 8 years now, but I've been involved in a lot of different groups along the way, and I'd like to give some perspectives today about this whole initiative. So I'll let my colleague go back and I guess we'll go back and forth and discuss what is white history, what it means by white heritage.
Mhm. You know, and the first part of me hearing about the conversation that happened at council and Flagstaff, and then also generally having grown up or having people ask us the question about why isn't there a White History Month or what does a celebration of white history mean? Um, I will be the first one to tell you I am for White History Month. I am for them having their heritage displayed and talked about. I think the real question is when I say that, and this is the caveat, um, what are they going to talk about? What are they alluding to that is historical and that they've done? And I'm not saying and maybe suggesting that white people have not done something. I just question what that is. And not to mention, I do think that while we do dedicate several months to, Black history, Hispanic and Latina, Native American, Native Indigenous, LGBTQI plus, AAPI, um, most of those things, and even in disability, most of those things in other groups that I may not have mentioned who are underrepresented generally are because the majority has chosen to deny, dismiss, denigrate, and take away the accomplishments and the strides and success and excellence that each of these groups have. So I don't think it's a question necessarily that white people and people who identify being white should not be proud of who they are or whence they came. But I do question what's that history that most of us have grown up listening to where all of us have been excluded or diminished greatly. Um, how do you have that conversation, and what is it that you're trying to say?
Well, I think that white history is every single day. You see it in their pioneer museums, the Civil War museums. It's all about their perspective of how they conquered these territories and conquer people that don't have a voice. And I feel it's assaulting for demanding a month due to the fact that we're struggling to keep our months going because they want to get rid of our months
Hmm.
of all our different heritage months, and we struggle every day to get our perspective out there and to teach. Even ethnic studies is basically getting under attack for teaching about diversity and teaching about exclusion.
Hmm.
And I think that there's enough courses, enough dialogue, enough documentaries that focus on their experiences, and we are struggling to gain those voices that are silenced. And I think that we need to do is do not support this initiative
Hmm.
because they have it every single day, and they go to the pioneer museums and do what they got to do. That's their prerogative,
Hmm.
like Brown will say. But we need to do is focus on our heritage months and grow them in the community spaces that we're lacking because we don't have the funding, or they want to cut our funding from
Hmm.
these type of events that we do on in the community in general, etc. So I think that it's interesting. This is the first time I heard of this. This is a surprising, idea.
Well, you know what? I think, I had the privilege of talking to and working with Coral Evans, Dr. Coral Evans, when she was on city council, but then at the same time, while she was, becoming the mayor. And so I think it's come up several times. Um, it's come up several times, and so I like I said, I understand it. I think all people should be, you know, proud of who they are and understand whence they came. I think it's just really a question of they seem to see that heritage as being something that's taken away, whereas I think overall the heritage that they're talking about has been exclusive, and so I think so, yeah, so I think the question becomes how do you have a white heritage month and tell everyone what it is that you're trying to talk about. I mean, last but not least, and I'll say this, and I got to jump real quick, and I'll come right back, um is looking at Paul Revere, and I think I was laughing with you, and I was laughing with Dr. Lewis about the story about Paul Revere, and I jokingly say the 5-10 minutes that he rode around saying that the British was coming, but there were three other people that did the same thing. One of them being an African American man that went 40 something miles to the north, and did that. And I don't think any of us have really heard about him, or at least I'll start with myself. I've never heard about him. And then there was a white female who did it and apparently went to the roughest part of where the British were coming. And yet I don't hear any of their names, kind of reference in that history. So it just becomes a thing of like, if you're going to tell the history, then what part of the history are you going to tell? And does that exclude other folks who've also made contributions? I mean, Henry Ford. Henry Ford, it's reported, got the patent for the car from someone who was African American. You know, my favorite brand of whiskey came from an African American. But yet his name ain't on the bottle, and neither was the black man that helped Henry Ford create his dynasty. So what information are you gonna have?
I agree. What else are you going to say about your heritage? You already control the media, you control the museums. You don't want people coloring your museums. I've served on boards, advisory boards at City Council where I lived at in California before I go back to grad school, and they used to get upset about Diversity Month, or struggling to have the Heritage Months because they didn't want those voices being heard. So why that we should give them more power and more voices that they have already? They control the narrative, what's going on in our society. They control the historical presence. They control everything. But why? What is the purpose? Why they want to do this? See, that's the question I want to know. Too bad one of those colleagues can come here and tell me what they want to do. Maybe it'll be better to have bring one of those persons that proposing it to discuss it. But it's a lot of I don't know what why do they feel excluded? They have is it because they feel a threat because of the population growth of people of color here in the United States? Is that the reality that they feel that they're overwhelmed because they're having less kids? I don't know.
And I have been privy to a few of those conversations. And the reasoning I've heard, well, everyone else has a month. So, why can't we have a month? And it kind of, that takes me back to the response when we say Black Lives Matter, then we hear, well, all lives matter. And so I I I don't know. It kind of, it makes me sometimes at a loss for words, um that humans cannot, first of all, realize that your history, my history, really is America's history. And so as smart as most of these people claim to be, and most of them work in the academy, that cannot accept, okay, well, hey, when we look through the history books and what we've learned, it's been, all the focus has been on European American history. So I don't know. What say you?
Yeah, I have sat in these debates over the years, ethnic studies in K-12 in California, which has made improvements. They have got it there. On the curriculum, those fights, for to get these curriculums in the schools so students can learn these different voices. That has been a struggle. The narrative. I have taught American history. I taught K-12 for a while before going back to grad school. Taught different avenues. I always had to just make up things. I had to make up my own curriculum to teach these voices because the book's basically based on their perspectives. Why you want to give them more space to promote their perspectives when they already got all the perspectives out there in American history textbook? You know,
So, with that being said, so do you think that should be a part of the council's response? Like, hey, which is predominantly European American. There are only two African American women who serve on the Flagstaff City Council. So what do you think should be the response? Because they are going to have to come back with the response. What if they approached you and said, Dr. Moreno, help us create, a civil, educated response? What do you think that should be, or hear, or sound like, or would read like?
Now more going more. That's my emotions. Okay, more into like strategy of answering them. I respect the fact that you want to have your heritage granted a month, but the reality is that these other voices within our community are silent and do not have the funding to have museums and have spaces to promote their viewpoints. So I think that you should allow these people to have their spaces versus you have your space already. Continue your space, but don't demand it on a city level, because there are people who are going to your museums, are going to your spaces, and engaging in that already. Why you want to take away people's spaces away that don't have a voice, that don't have funding to do these events that the city is trying to fund, on a yearly basis to promote this diverse voices in a community that have a long history, that are part of this American history of Flagstaff. Going back to the different communities that settle here.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you should attempt. More. But that's what Council tell them, that we appreciate you, but same time that you have the narrative and you have the space to do it year round. And Thanksgiving and Columbus Day is your holiday in a nice way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, most of our holidays are Eurocentric. Uh, Easter, Christmas, St. Patrick's Day we just celebrated. So George. I mean, we could go every month. George Washington Day, President's Day. You will not find anyone from your heritage or my heritage in those days, and I have yet to
Yeah.
see many people acknowledge the African presence in Irish
Hmm.
uh, heritage.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we don't want to talk about the Moors and them, and why that leprechaun has curly woolly hair. So, but let's just say, let's pretend, Dr. Moreno,
Yeah.
let's pretend if we were going to create a white American White Heritage History Month, what would that look like? And Dr. Tease is back, so I'm putting out the question: what would American White Heritage History Month look like? How do we begin the first day of the month? What are we doing? We're going to a program. What's that program we're going to see?
Uh, Pioneers, coming here and taking people's land away, enslaving African Americans, enslaving natives. I could go on and on and on the list. Exploiting workers. Also being racist towards people of color workers, because there was racism within different working class people. It's a lot. I'll let Martin talk about it. It's a lot that days. So you want to have an anti-Mexican day or anti-black day? I'm just throwing those out.
You
Asian.
know,
What's the first day? What's the first program we're going to, brother?
I'm with Moreno. I think I want to see, um, what is it, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria coming through, crashing in the waves and doing all that stuff that I think I've seen before. But then I want to see them when the true interaction that they had with the natives, that they first came encounter with, and then the ways in which they taught them how to survive and do everything, and then we see them taking their land, taking their resources for the betterment of themselves, But I just and it's one of those where I'm not trying to be funny. I don't know. I don't know that they were all bad, but I don't know that everything that they attributed to being the success that we know of what they would want to show is actually true. So I think it would be, how do we refute some of that information? But I think the first thing has to be the pioneers, or whomever, the first people of white descent coming over here, and then how they intermingled with the natives. I put natives in quote, but but the people that were here before them, they didn't discover them. You can't discover something, when they were already here. So I almost wonder if, like, White History Month or any kind of thing would almost be a satire, and then how do we start really questioning and examining those things that we know to be, true, that we were told indifferently. What
So
about you?
yeah,
What would you like to see, Dr. Lewis?
make America great again day. I hear that all the time. You know what I mean? Like, I ask people, what do you mean? I asked my students, a couple of students, active service students in the past, I asked them, what do you mean by I asked them to define it for me. Make America great again. What do you mean by that? They can never answer.
When did we stop being great?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Or
but
were we ever great?
yeah. But I think the interesting thing though, but going back, if you look at from that period to even, let's say, the founding fathers, let's give the founding fathers their credit, right? But the credit of what we're giving them is they excluded every single person that was not white, rich, landowning Christian, you know, blah 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 blah. So, like, okay, so even if we're giving them the credit for the Constitution, that what they created and the information that we still live with today has adapted and changed because it's excluded so many folks, including white women, and people who identify as white now, whether they be non-binary, transgender, or whatever their gender expression may be, but they were excluded. So I think when we're looking at that history and we're trying to really build the timeline, I think Smith and Wesson. Okay, I think when I was talking to you the other day, maybe Smith and Wesson, was like, they created guns. Okay, but wasn't it the Japanese that created the gunpowder? So, you know, I'm trying to give them something.
In defense of this, if I served on a committee, which I know I would not, for White American Heritage History
Mhm.
Month, I would like to see a full week, because it would take about a week to cover the Constitution.
Mm.
I think that many Americans do not even fully understand the Constitution. In fact, I've found that more ethnic people are able to have an informed and educated conversation about the
Mm.
Constitution. So I would definitely like to see something. And we have someone coming into the barber shop.
Okay.
Good. It's good. Incoming. Good. Good
I think
conversation.
it's Dr. G.
Peace and blessings. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
peace and blessings to you,
Hey,
brother.
Dr. G.
All
Yeah.
right, all right. How's everybody doing out there?
We're doing
Pretty
good.
good.
Because
How
it's
are
wicked in
you?
these mean streets. It's wicked in these mean streets. You know what I'm
I mean, it's
Yeah.
wicked, brother, wicked.
saying? Oh
we're
man.
asking, we're asking. You're coming in at the perfect time. What do you want to see for 30 days during uh, American White Heritage History Month? What's the first day? What are we celebrating? What's the program looking like?
Well, this is very simple. I mean, if we're gonna truly celebrate white history, then we have to celebrate Africans. Because if the oldest, because white people love data, white people love science, and if we're going to go by data and science, then that means that the oldest fossil human remains, I believe, were found in Ethiopia, which is in the continent of Africa. So if that's the case, then that means white people walking around are blacker than me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, all I'm saying is I'm just going by the history. So, I mean, you can call it black, you can call it white, but I'm just calling it history. So, this idea of white history, I mean, all it is just acknowledging, because see, the thing is, you can't tell the American story, quote unquote, without invoking Latinos. You can't tell the American story without invoking indigenous. You can't tell the American story without invoking black people. I mean, we built literally the Capitol and the White House.
Mm-hmm.
So white history, by definition, includes all of our history.
Yep. Yeah. You're absolutely right. So I was just saying, and you as an attorney, I think if 1 week should be devoted to the Constitution. And I was just saying, right as you were coming in, that I found that more ethnic people have a better understanding of the Constitution than European Americans. What say you to that?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why is because we, by design, are sensitive to how the quote unquote rules work, especially when rules are commonly used against us, right? And so that makes us all the more sensitive. We pay attention. We're very careful because we don't want to be in positions where people are already penalizing us and making our lives more difficult. So yes, we are, in fact, very familiar and very intimate with the rules, whether it be the Constitution or, the bylaws and state regulations, what have you. And so I think, if anything, speaks to this larger conversation. So many people say they love the Constitution, but do you really love it? I mean, do you really know what it stands for? Did you really take time and actually read it? I mean, because, how can we, all I'm saying is, if we're talking about being consistent, this dude named Thomas Jefferson, maybe dude is disrespectful. One of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, wrote that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. Well, I editorialized. He said all men. He said all men. He said all men. So he excluded over half the population, a very important part of the population, because I don't know any human being on the planet that came through here, without a woman. You know what I'm saying? I don't know any human being that did not do that. So that being said, he writes these beautiful poetic phrases. It is amazing, it is amazing, it is amazing. But the other part of it is, Thomas Jefferson was a founding father in more ways than one. In fact, when I say one, I mean 2, 3, 4, 5, let's count them, 6 children he fathered by an enslaved teenage female named Sally Hemings.
It was a love story.
I mean, listen, it's a true story. It's a true story.
It was a love story.
So when you want to talk about rules, you want to be consistent. My whole thing is, okay, by definition of your laws. I mean, I didn't write the laws. I mean, I was just born like 40-something years ago. So by definition of your laws, is that considered consent? If someone under the age of 18 who's enslaved, so if that's not consent, then should we say Thomas Jefferson, the rapist? But see, that doesn't sound good. That makes the narrative sound a little muddy and messy, right? But again, if you want to go by the rules, if you want to go by the letter of the law, that's what he was. He was a rapist.
But
Dr. Tees was saying that it was actually a love story between he and his sister Hemming.
Yeah. but
just like Monsters Ball. Just like Monsters Ball is a love story too.
But you know what's funny, Dr. G, is that when you think about that, I remember at a point in time, did we lose him? Oh no. I think Bernadine went out. But I was thinking about a time when I was in grade school. I went to St. Gregory's Catholic School in Phoenix. And I remember we were doing something where we were talking about Thomas Jefferson. And I brought up the fact that he had kids by a black slave. And I think the Jefferson Society, as it was, are descendants through that bloodline. And so I was like, doesn't that make them biracial or black in this case? And, I got detention. And so, but I think that and then years later on Oprah, when she had the family members come together, and they finally and they admitted that who Sally was and the line that they came through, many of them had black blood. But we don't talk about that because again, that lie was that it was a love story, but she lived underneath the basement, in the kitchen, while having these kids by him. But so I still go back to say, like, you know, I really you got on it. I think Bernadine says she wouldn't want to sit on the board of anyone trying to make the decision on White History Month. I would love to sit on the board as they discuss White History Month, because I would want to fact check them and find out, like, you know, did they say, and whoever they're attributing everything to, did it really happen? But then also, what stuff are they leaving out? Because are they gonna have the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryans, um, miscegenation laws, redlining laws,
Right,
all that stuff
right,
that they created? Are they gonna have
right,
all that in there and discuss all
right.
that?
Well, I mean, and you make an excellent point because, mind you, we didn't create these laws. they did. I mean, think about how on the books there is a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1887. I mean, literally the name Chinese is in the law where we're saying specifically we do not want you coming into this country. And lo and behold, can you imagine? Can you imagine our Chinese American brothers and sisters? Did you know that there are more Chinese food restaurants than any other fast food restaurant in our country? Right? So the thing is, like, on Monday through Friday, oh, I can't stand, they can't come in our country. But then on Friday night,
Mhm.
what are you doing? Right? So the idea is, let's just be consistent. So with this idea of white history, I agree with you, Dr. Tees. Okay, if we're gonna tell it, then let's tell the full story.
Mhm.
After all, you want to tell the full story about Bill Cosby. You want to be very clear about, that what he did was not cool. You take off all his shows off the TV and everything. And again, I didn't say that was cool. I didn't say it was cool. But what I'm saying is, can we be consistent?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're saying that uh, uh, with the founding father who wrote all these poetic phrases, he's doing very similar things in terms of violating people's rights, taking advantage of them, and all of a sudden he's just complicated. Come on, I
Yeah.
mean, let's just call it. Let's just call it for what it is.
Yeah. But and even when you do that and you look at all the founding fathers, but then when you also then go into, you brought up the law with Chinese in it. I remember reading the book White by Law, and that talked about, you know, first you were white because, the law says you're white, and then you were white because we say you're white. So they decided to make those exclusions, and I just, like I said, I would be prone to really want to find out, like, what did they do? And I think I was looking at something the other day about, like, inventions coming into this. And I think it was like, they did the watch and they did the light bulb and they did, so on and so forth. But I'm like, but did they really? Like I said,
But
I would I'm still shocked with Hidden Figures and the movie Hidden Figures. I never knew that there was three black women behind not, NASA in the launch, and yet let them tell it. It was the white dudes and Glenn, who went to the moon, but you needed those women to get there, and that they were excluded. And I just find, again, if we're having this conversation, what are is what they're really saying and what they are led to believe to be true actually that, and how do you build on that when so much has been excluded that was accomplished by everyone else that was not, a white Christian heterosexual land owning male Protestant. And where does that diverge?
precisely, precisely. I mean, I think that's a beautiful point. That's a beautiful point. I mean, because the fact of the matter is that when you talk about our country right now, it cannot look the way it does. It cannot be as strong as it is, as productive as it is, without all these contributions that oftentimes go unheralded and unrecognized. You're absolutely right. Our fingerprints have been over this from the day one. Our footprints have been over all over this from day one. I mean, think about like the quote unquote holiday Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving, right? I mean, where we implicitly acknowledge that, we would not have survived, civilization would not have survived without the contributions. But then, do we really actually acknowledge these contributions of our indigenous brothers and sisters, right? Other than saying we're going to name a football team after you, yeah, right. So, I mean, I think when you talk about this idea of whiteness, I think even that needs to be questioned. Look at how the Irish were painted when they first came over here, right? When they weren't fitting in that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant box, they were depicted as ape-like. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they were ridiculed. Even our Jewish brothers and sisters, when they first came over here, because of their customs and their religion, they were ridiculed, they were ostracized, and some argue still are. And so the idea is that, what degree has whiteness actually changed, right? When we talk about how over time, whiteness then became this protective layer, right? Or at least because it is in contrast to, visibly identifiable people of color, i.e. black people, indigenous people, Latinos, right? So this idea was whiteness all of a sudden became protection. In fact, there are books written about how, some of Irish, immigrants, Italian immigrants, engaged in lynching tactics just so they could prove their quote-unquote whiteness, right? Just so that they wouldn't also be, targeted and bullied and ostracized, right? So, I mean, this idea of whiteness, I think, just needs to be questioned overall. I mean, so, I would just flip the question back to these white history advocates. What exactly do they mean? What history do they plan to tell?
No, I agree. I completely agree. And Dr. Moreno, you have been a little quiet. I don't want to usurp, but I agree with you. I think my question is, what history do you want to tell, and who are you attributing, this to? And I'll say before you got on, I'm not arguing that some folks may not have done stuff. I just question, what that was, or who did they leave out when they tell the stories. Dr.
Exactly.
M.
Yeah. Dr. Moreno, what say you?
So, well, I'm against the Heritage Month for white people, man. Because look at what they have. I was saying earlier, they got the museums, they got the forums, they got the media, they got all the control of communications here in this continent. And we know we don't have no voices. We have to fight for our voices and fight for our Heritage Months and fight for what we believe in to promote our voices. But it's tough to do, as we know that as educators, we're trying to tell people about our perspectives and the various perspectives out there, our society. So why do you want to give a forum for more of this hypothesis of these, few people want to control the agenda of Heritage Months, and promote their continue promoting their history and that we're adopting every day too.
Yeah. And again, I guess it maybe it's just the me that loves maybe the colorful nature of things, i.e., drama. But I really would love to hear what they're proposing.
Me too.
Uh, I really would love to hear, and I don't know um, if Dr. Lewis is still here, but I know there was a conversation about it. But did they ever give like an outline of
Well,
what they wanted to propose?
and Dr. T, to your point, here's the part that just chafes my glutes. Excuse me, I'm not trying to be rude to the children listening, but this is what chafes my glutes a little bit. It just seems like reactionary, kind of like how that Blue Lives Matter was in reaction to the Black Lives Matter. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, wait a minute. Let's be clear. We created, Dr. Carter G. Woodson created back in the 1920s,
Mm-hmm.
Black History Week, which grew to Black History Month, because there was an absence, as you were saying earlier, of recognition. It's not to say that one race is
Yeah.
the dominant race and the best. There's one story. If you go downtown Washington, D.C. National Mall, you will only see white statues.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's as if nobody else played a part, an instrumental part in the building of this country, right? And so what we're saying is that when we talk about Garrett, building the stoplight, to the brother who helped Edison with the filament. I mean, all these inventions, all these innovations. What we're saying is that we created this idea of these heritage months to acknowledge
Mm-hmm.
what was underrepresented and overlooked. So when you come back saying, well, we need to acknowledge White History Month, well, that's what we do every day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at all our history books. There's nothing but white history in all the
Mm-hmm.
books that we all study and learn. So what is it that you're talking about? What
Yeah.
are you afraid of, right? If anything, we all stand to learn, from multiple perspectives. So what are you afraid of?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And and I'll say this, and I think this is a conversation that I've had with people over and over, is that I think that the lie that we've all been told, I think they don't want to unravel it, because then whatever that level of supremacy is, whatever that level of privilege is that they have been able to hold on to, actually I think will crumble. Because if you start finding out, that people were instrumental in other areas, and we weren't just slaves, we weren't just savages, we weren't just, whatever the colloquial idiom is. um I think that really starts dismantling, that notion of white supremacy, um, and white privilege, that actually hurts more white people than I think it hurts it hurts everybody else. And I think that that's what I would be interested to know, in this calling for, White Heritage Month, White History Month, or whatever they would like to be. I would like to understand what they want to talk about.
Right. Because
'Cause
again, like I'm saying, it seems reactionary, and also it plays upon this idea of the zero sum game. So
mhm,
the idea that the more we talk about Latino history, it seems like there's
Mhm.
this fear or concern of the less we talk about something else, or the
mhm,
less we focus. No, 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 no. It's not a zero sum. By us acknowledging that there have been people who have been here on whose homeland on which our university stands, right?
mhm, mhm.
What we're doing is we're adding. We're growing. We're adding. It's not a zero. We're not taking away from
Yeah.
anything, right? If anything, we're in a better position to interface with the future.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, if and it seems to me that that part of history and multicultural history, that talks about the contributions of everybody else, too, I think it is an addition. I don't think in many ways it slights, some stuff that people have done, but I think, but it certainly adds some color and flavor to it. When you talk about the Navajo code talkers, when you talk about, those people who may have been, immigrants who, in order to gain citizenship, joined the military so they could fight. Slaves who, who were considered property but fought in order for freedom, that sometimes never happened for them. I think that those are the things that I think that you're right. It's a reaction that they're seeing themselves in such a light that doesn't necessarily look good. Um, but I think, you know, is there someone, like, I would love for us, is there someone that we could be like, there's that one person that you could build a pillar around White History Month? And I just I and I'm trying to figure it out. Like, well, I think about the Cromers in Flagstaff. The Cromers, I want to say his name was Jim Cromer, but he was an attorney, and he worked with Wilson Riles, to help integrate the schools in Flagstaff before Brown versus the Board of Education. So, like, I could see him having, a spotlight, and his family having a spotlight, but he didn't do it by himself. And so I don't know, how to, how recognize him, but yet also understand that he did it with someone else of color. So it wasn't by themselves. But that's one, maybe. you know. And I guess the coaches, all the coaches across the land who help herald, football players. And I say that facetiously. But I don't know. I really wonder who they would recognize, or who, I can't do it for them. but I wonder who they would recognize and what they would champion as, you know, their accomplishments and their achievement.
Yeah, you bring it back up because even in the farm worker movement, the UW had some good Anglo-American, Euro-American organizers that were leading leadership that helped strategy, like Marshall Glantz. He helped strategize the boycott movement in 1968, and other lawyers, that were involved. Okay, so yes, they deserve, recognition, but again, I mean, those are a handful of people.
I don't know. I'm like, so I think Dr. G, before you got on, they were like, they asked the question of what was the first thing we would like to see that first week. I said it would be the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria crashing through the waves as they were coming to the new land. Um, but what, and I'm as a filmmaker and someone who does film, I'm trying to picture, how to dramatize that and make that, appealing.
Yeah,
But do you have?
he's off.
Oh, I think he dropped off. Okay.
Probably because of the reception.
Yeah.
No, but you have a point. Okay, there are some good, there's some good Anglo-American, Euro-American people that fought side by side with these social movements or civil rights movements.
Mm-mm.
And they deserve recognition for that. But I don't think that wasn't their intention. Their intention was to help the cause because they're part of the cause.
Mm-hmm.
Their intention was to help farm workers or help civil rights, emerge here in the United States.
Yeah. And I think, and I think to the extent that we can say that there were, to quote Donald Trump, there were some good people on the other side, but I think he was talking in a different way. But,
Yeah.
I think there were people who were of Anglo, Euro, white descent who identify as white, who, joined causes. I'm thinking of the abolitionists, I'm thinking about folks who were part of the civil rights movement, and those people who kind of, who helped break down doors and barriers by way of who they were, their privilege, and their skin, and their skin color and complexion. I think that should be recognized. I just don't think that it should be overshadowed by, and I think we get into those tropes. So like the white savior trope,
Mhm.
and I guess that's the thing. Like if we're looking at how we build out and flesh out like a white history calendar, then I think we also have to look at the tropes of then if you're going to tell me like Abraham Lincoln,
Oh, yeah.
uh, hey man, good to see you. But if you're going to tell me about Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves and whatever, but like, don't we have to talk about it took him what 60 years before he did it? And I could be wrong on my timeline, but he didn't do it all the way. He wasn't altruistic. And one of the things that I hate, I mean, I as a filmmaker and someone who critiques film, Lincoln, I think production wise, great film. Steven Spielberg, put together, a masterpiece when you think about just the production of it. But the story, you know, kind of I'm gonna cry like call BS, and the sad part of it to me is he has black children. Why would you introduce your black children to that narrative and that story and you didn't have Frederick Douglass in there who was a proponent who actually helped push him to do what he did? They didn't talk about all the abolitionists who were black and white. you know um I think one of the things, the lines that always got me in there is that he said that he would free the slaves if it would save the union, but he would also keep them in slaves if it did not. And I was like, you can't tell me that I have issue, just problematic issue with that guy. Like, just on that alone. And also considering the time frame. I always tell students to remember the time, but I'm like, so I will the nature of me, I would love to help them flush it out, but I think if we're gonna flush it out, they gotta deal with the minutia of what was, what is, and then if we can cherry pick some good people out of there to be like, but there's, so and so. But I that's my take.
Well, Dr. Tease, I think you make an excellent point because I think the context is so very important, right? So for many of us who may have been in a relationship with someone before, context is always key, right? So, for example, like say you have a partner, and you come home and they have a big box of chocolates and flowers, and they have this big cheese grin. The idea is like, okay, well, what's going on? And it's like, oh, I was just thinking about you, right? Oh, wow, that sounds awesome, right? Now, question: um, Is this a nice gesture? Absolutely. But the next question is, would this gesture maybe change in terms of in your mind if you found out after the fact that the day before they were maybe doing something that they should not have been doing, right? Maybe talking to somebody else, or right, they were playing dirty, and so this was a way to maybe distract you or make up. Then it puts it in a different context, like, okay, well, were you being sincere? Did you really care about me, or were you just trying to just distract me, right? Versus you just really just thought about me and we're just really trying to be nice. So context is always key, right, in terms of the history, right, and the reason behind why people do things. I say that to say, you talk about Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. You are absolutely accurate, and a lot of people are not as familiar with his first inauguration address, where he was, in the SAT word is ambivalent, right? So a lot of people, when they go to Washington D.C., I talked about this earlier in our conversation, they go to the National Mall. We've seen it in so many TV shows and movies. Planet of the Apes, Lincoln up high, the Daniel Chester French, sculpture. It is magnificent. It is. It is impressive because it was built to be impressive. It's like 19 feet tall. You have to ascend the stairs, and it's amazing. It's like a Greek temple, neoclassical type structure. A lot of people walk away with this narrative of like, wow, man, Lincoln, man, what an awesome dude, man. He like freed the slaves. You know what I'm saying? Like almost as if he was at night tossing and turning, like, oh man, what am I gonna do to free all these black people? Not quite. He told us in his own words, hey, listen, my concern is not these Negroes. Again, I'm not trying to be offensive, but the idea is that he told us with his own words, my paramount objective is the union. If I have to free them, I will. If I don't, I won't. My paramount objective is the union, right? So again, context. I just think it just helps us understand. Again, now it doesn't say that he, was any less of a good guy or anything of that nature, but is he this larger than life hero for ending enslavement? I don't know. And while I have the floor, I was just throwing a little detail that a lot of people will say, well, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation and that ended enslavement. Again, if we're talking about white history, you want to be accurate. Actually, no. The Emancipation Proclamation, contrary to popular belief, did not free the enslaved, right? The official end of enslavement, at least in the United States of America, came with the passage of the 13th Amendment in December of 1865, right? And so, therefore, the Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed a couple of years earlier, was actually a military field order that had consequences that affected the outcome of the war, right? But it did not free any enslaved individual because at that time, you have to realize enslavement was legal in states such as Delaware and Maryland, right? Right. So it's not like, by writ of the pen, Abraham Lincoln just like, the floodgates opened and things of that nature. And also remember, the South had seceded from the Union, right? So it's almost the equivalent of, if they wrote, came up with a new law in Vietnam tomorrow, God bless Dr. An, former ethnic studies, right? If they come up with a law that just said like, well, everybody on the Live Black experience gets a Tesla. I mean, it sounds nice, but I don't think we're going to get one tomorrow because it's a different country and those rules don't necessarily apply to us. And so, again, even though it's still in the geographic area of the United States, a lot of people are not really clear on the South has seceded. They had their own capital. They had their own president. They had their own currency, ladies and gentlemen. You can look it up on Google, right? They had their own currency. So, again, it did have its effect, but it wasn't, if you're going to be technical, it didn't have the effect of the letter of the law.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say all that. And while you were talking, I was then thinking about the Confederacy, and then I was thinking about just that whole process, whether the Southern states, the Confederacy, and the flag. And I'm like, how, and that's another interesting thing. Like, is that a part of your White History, White Heritage Month? And then what do you think about that? And how do you attribute any, how do you attribute anything in that nature of what all was done in the name of the Confederacy? And as you know that it enslaved people, the brutality that was done in the name, for of people against others who they felt that were nothing, or less than. So I just, I think that context and content does matter, and I just wonder, for those that would propose this, what are they proposing? Because I don't even think they made apple pie, to be quite honest. I was looking at, I was talking to Director Lewis, and I was like, who made apple pie? Like, or Betsy Ross, did she really did she really do the flag, or was that somebody else? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah. So I mean, I think in answer to your question, when you talk about the Confederacy or this idea of heritage, I think it's a very profound question. This idea of in a country that was built upon freedom, like what did freedom mean? So did freedom mean I literally have the liberty to enslave others for my personal profit? I mean, right? Isn't that kind of, in contradiction, right? This idea that I have the freedom to enslave others for personal profit, right? So what about the individual who's enslaved? Well, what about them? Like, don't they have freedom? Don't they have autonomy? Don't they have, a will, or ideas? And so I think if we're talking about, oh, well, Confederacy is not about racism; it's about heritage. Well, I mean, what's included in that heritage,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
look at movies like Gone with the Wind. I mean, they'll tell you in the very beginning that that this was a civilization, right? When cavaliers were fair, right? I mean, it's almost like at the very beginning they're telling you that we're reminiscing on the good old days, right? When
Mhm.
the way things were, and it's like, well, good old days for who?
Yeah.
you,
Exactly.
understand what I'm saying? Like, you taking away land from Latino Americans, you give them, disease blankets to indigenous Americans, and then you're enslaving African Americans, then you're not letting Chinese Americans in. Like, what type of picture is this? Right? Well, depending upon your perspective, it could be good, but is it a holistic perspective?
Yeah.
That's all we're saying.
Yeah. I don't think that there's any disagreement. And I think, because I love the nature of the conversation and the nature of the dialogue, I would love, for people like you and for Dr. Moreno and others to be there while they're having while they're having those conversations, and while they're, if they're trying to create something, you know, how do I say politely, and I put that in quotes, but how do you um meet them to have that conversation? Because I think it goes back to what you were saying at the end of the day. I think both Dr. Moreno and Dr. Lewis all said it is, which I think it's a reaction. And it's a what about, and I don't get the sense in large part that it's really about trying to highlight magnificence and excellence of one identity, but is saying we're afraid that you're taking everything away that we've been told to be true. That I'm not going to say it's a lie, but I'm not going to say it's not factual, it's not accurate in most instances, and there's probably a lot to be desired based upon who's telling the story and that narrative.
Yeah, it's a culture of fear, because they're holding on to what they have left because they're losing it because of the demographics. They're
Mhm.
not. They're shrinking, and they're going to hold on to it, and they're going to push their ideology in any way possible to not let us have a voice.
Mhm.
So that's the purpose why they're doing it, not because they want to glorify their old days. They want to basically get rid of us, get rid
Mhm.
of our identity, and that's what they want to do. This, and this is they're in our face now. I think this has changed in the last 5 years. They're gonna
Mhm.
they're gonna come out more and try to get rid of all these different programs and different things that were gained in the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
And to your point, Dr. Murno, I mean, just look what's happening in Florida, right? In terms of with the whole African American AP, y'all know that scandal, or even in the state where I'm living right now, Texas, where critical race theory is a bad word, and where public universities are no longer able to engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, right? So, universities such as the University of Texas have had to shut down their offices that deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, it's not just for people of color; it's for all students. Because again, I mean, what's the purpose of a university? Is to provide youth with skills necessary to interface with a growing global economy. I mean, when you say global, we were talking about different people from different cultures in different parts of the world, and being sensitive, at least being aware, being exposed. This is what facilitates this idea of a better relationship for good business. I mean, after all, I mean, if what's good enough for America is good for the world, in that sense, I'm confused as to when it comes to understanding the history in these, interpersonal relationships, in the classroom, why all of a sudden it doesn't compute, right? So it works when it comes to selling your product, making money. I mean, think about how, Hollywood would be a show of what it is if we're unable to sell its movies outside of the United States of America, right? I mean, just think about how many products that we use are exported to so many different parts of the world. Think about your Coca-Colas. Think about your Microsofts. I mean, think about your McDonald's. How they depend upon these global relationships, right? So when it comes to capitalism, that's when it's good. We want to interface and have Coca-Cola translated in all these different languages and sold all over the world. But then when it comes to us learning about the countries that we want to send it to, and then in learning about the countries, we may have to learn some maybe darker chapters about how people in these countries are treated by some of our prior administrations or even current administrations. I mean, this is all part of it, right? And it's not to throw to make it black and white and say this is about good and evil, because it's very much complicated, right? Now again, I mean, rape is rape, okay, and rape is wrong, okay. So we're clear about that, but this idea of how do we understand what the nuances are if we don't even have the opportunity to study them and discuss them. And I think that when you talk about this idea of white history, I concur with both of you that it does feel very much reactionary, and and I'm just really curious, as I was asking earlier, as to what the concern truly is about, because at least within the United States, by most statistical measures, many people who consider themselves part of the white demographic category are winning, right? I mean, when you look at who is benefiting from higher salaries, longer life expectancies, who has a higher home ownership rates, when you look at all these metrics, I mean, it is clear that there are disparities, right? So I'm just really curious as to what this movement is really about, right? Because if the premise or the concern is that right now we're doing too much by incorporating ethnic studies into our curriculums, right? If that's too much, then I'm just curious as to too much. I mean, how is it too much? Like, what's the tipping point? But what's the concern? Like, how is this going to affect people if we're just now putting a couple more additional pieces into this puzzle? How is that going to negatively affect this? I'm just genuinely curious, and I think what we should do is, rather than take the offensive, is I think we should simply hear what these people have to say, because I don't know if they know what they have to say.
I agree, and I think going back to what you so beautifully said is, I would say to you that the impetus of all this is fear,
Mhm.
and I think, and then on top of truth, and not subjective truth, but very objective. And that I think that when you really start going down and like you said, they're winning, and they're winning not because they just did, and I'll use the word superior. They're winning not because they're superior, as in they're better than everybody else. They're winning because there's been institutions and frameworks and matrices that have put them where they are. So when you think about, the inventions and the things that others did and they took credit for, and they made lots of money off of, and if you're a capitalist in capitalist society, if money wins, then you're understanding that a lot of people stole people's inventions, or they co-opted them or whatever for their gain and their benefit, whereas those who did not look like them did not prosper in the same way. Or if you think about education and the fact that if higher education was not for everybody until processes made it so. If you're thinking about where you could live and environment and conditioning, there are people who couldn't, there's still red line districts in Phoenix and Arizona, that said that people couldn't live certain places or they couldn't do certain things. So I think, yeah, the question, I think, undoubtedly has to be, there's a fear about the truth. And I think the truth would crumble in the fact that that superior notion and that privilege that I think most people have grown up believing to be true actually is not so. And I'll say, and I said this to Moreno and to some other people, I guess my philosophy is, if I'm better than you,
Mhm.
if I'm technically better than someone, I don't have to do anything. I just have to be.
Mhm.
But if I have to take your sticks away, take your toys away, limit your time, move you to a certain spot and do whatever, then, which has kind of been historically what's been done, then am I really superior? Or did I just have might and numbers on my side that could help amass, those things that help them to win to this day?
Doc, I mean, you make an excellent point when you talk about redlining. And for anyone listening out there who's not familiar with the term, um, Dr. Tees is not conjuring anything up out of his own imagination, right? So when we talk about the housing market, and from what we're told, home ownership is one of the cornerstones to building wealth here within the United States of America, right? But this opportunity has been systematically denied a large swath of people, all on account of race. What do we mean? So, redlining is the term that comes from the practice that, now again, whether it still goes on now, not sure, but we know for sure, it's documented, it did happen up until, at least up until the 50s, whereby many real estate, unscrupulous, should I say, real estate agents would have maps of the neighborhoods on the walls of the offices, and literally would take a red pen outlining the neighborhoods by which they would not, NOT, not show homes, or banks similarly would not offer financing to these neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods, dun, 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 just happen to be occupied by people of color, right? Brown and black people. And so what you're saying is that there's this collusion that's taking place amongst agencies and officials, whereby resources are being restricted, right? And so stories are replete in the history books of the first families that would, say, move into a block, and how they would be treated, because the idea was that the block was not supposed to be integrated, right? Even though, according to the technical letter of the law, anyone who has the money, say, isn't this so ironic? Where the color green should be the predominant factor. If the house is $100,000 and I have $100,000, then I get the home, because what do you care about? You care about the $100,000. No, not quite the case. They cared about who was giving you the $100,000. Was it a white hand? Was it a black hand? That sort of deal. And so this redlining was a means by which systematically resources would be diverted or restricted, thereby preventing individuals from being able to buy homes, right? In addition to redlining, you also had other tactics such as restrictive covenants.
Hmm.
These were legal agreements whereby, again, I mean, you can't see it just by looking at the house from the street, but if you went downtown to the courthouse and looked at the paperwork, you would discover it, which is, again, hard to do. So it's kind of like this open secret, whereby I would say, you know what, Moreno, I'm going to sell you the home, but you promise not to sell it to people like Dr. T's, right?
Mhm.
And it was legal. I mean, this is a document. I mean, restrictive covenants. And so this is how many neighborhoods stayed white, not because it just happened magically to be that way, but because, good, hardworking people with the money. If anything, you would think, because the fear was, right? You say fear. The fear was that if we let the Latino family move in, they're going to bring down the neighborhood. They're going to play their music. So what family doesn't play music and have a good time and barbecues and things of that nature, right? So when you do it, it's okay on the 4th of July, fireworks all in the middle of the street, right? But when I do it, all of a sudden it's a problem. Which one is it, right? But with anything, you would think, given how difficult it was, and even now, right, with the high interest rates, et cetera, that the family that scraped and saved and moved into the neighborhood, these are the people who you don't need to worry about. They're the ones working hard. They're the ones who are trying to make sure that they're taking care of what little that they have, right? So this narrative that you're just going to come in and destroy everything, again, this is false, right? But these are just a couple of the ways, ways in which systematically, right, resources were restricted.
Yeah. And I guess, in having that conversation and knowing that, I guess I always want to go back to whoever the architects of a white heritage or white history month would be. How do they then discuss that? How do you talk about? And I guess I look about when we talk about Black History Month, and Black History Month, is really about Black excellence, and I think it shows that we're more than what we were told that we were as slaves. We're more than we came over here in ships. We're more than Dr. King had a dream, and then there was a speech, and then everything was magically okay after his speech. But I think, when you think about us trying to do more to show how our humanity is just as good and equitable as others, who may not look like us. I just wonder, how do they square, those kind of laws and those kind of, things that have built society that's impacting us, today. Um, and if they're having those conversations, then how do you deal with the fact that again, thinking about military and everyone, and we salute and we respect people who are giving their lives and their service in the name of the country, but yet how we diminish those who did not look like the majority, or how we kind of blanket them. So I just, I hear you talking, and as I think about it, like I said, and I want everybody to feel comfortable. I think, I do think, looking at and understanding, I think the nature of what whiteness is, I think is something that actually, I think if more people and those who identify as white or come from those backgrounds really understood what that meant, I think we would have a very different conversation. And I don't think it's always one of they're less than, but I think it is one I don't think they know. And I'm using the words truth and facts and and the subjective and the objective of them. But I'm wondering, if we had those conversations, if there was a Dr. G and a Dr. Moreno in the room when they were saying certain things to challenge them
Mhm.
on on the content and the context of that, how does that change the conversation?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it should be. They should have, maybe the council should invite some experts, invite us there and to a town hall meeting, and let's have a conversation with these people. What do you mean by this? And then have a debate.
Mhm.
But it might get a little. People might get a little, dirtier because that's the way some people are, and the people can handle debates.
Mhm.
But
Well, that's why I think it should be a dialogue. I think it should be a conversation. I don't have skin in the game, so there's nothing for me to win. Um,
yeah,
I do find it, I find it intriguing that when you ever hear these conversations about, well, why don't we have, a White History Month, or why don't we have a white student union, or why don't we have these things that preface white when the predominant culture is white? The institutions that we work at, predominantly white people are on the campus. So your existence and your representation, I don't think is necessarily in question, and I put that in quotes. But I think, whereas, it, if I had $5 for every person of color that I saw on campus, I'd be rich. But I would
Mm.
have to search far and wide sometimes, to find them. But I don't have to ever worry about running into someone, who identifies as white or from and for that background. So I just wonder, how those conversations really permeate, then what the whole nature of this is. And I would love to hear how they presented or what they presented at council that generates this kind of conversation.
So, Dr. T, let me ask you a question. Dr. Murray,
Mhm.
let me ask you a question. Um, what type of movie is Barbershop? What would you say?
The one that Tim Story directed,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
oh, hmm, in my area, I'm gonna give it a black film label, but
So you call it a black movie? Okay. What about
I
Soul Food?
I would argue both of those are probably black films.
We call them black movies, right?
Yeah,
Wait, what about Titanic?
that's a white movie.
It's a white movie, or is it just a
Well, if we're having the general conversation and we weren't talking from my lens, I think it's just seen as a movie.
it's
Um, but
not just a movie, but one of the greatest
oh
love
yeah, well yeah,
stories
yeah, love
of all
story,
time,
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
right?
uh-huh.
I mean, so goes to your point. I mean, so when we talk about this idea of like of whiteness, I mean, in so many ways we just take it for granted. I mean, because in the movie Titanic, I don't recall seeing many people that look like Dr. Moreno, looking like Dr. Tease. I don't recall many people. But what's interesting is the movie made money. It didn't suffer. What about Oppenheimer? Right? Wasn't that like what a hit from last summer? Right? Oppenheimer, right? Academy
Mhm.
Award winning. How many people of color in that movie?
Not a one that I can think of, unless they were passing.
And so again, this is just last summer, right? So in other words, not having people of color in it didn't hinder it. It didn't hurt
Hmm.
it. It was still very famous, very widely distributed, made all this money. It was great. But what's so interesting is, like you said, I mean, you get, more than three, people of color in a movie, and all of a sudden it's a Latino film. All of a sudden it's just a black movie. Movie. It is only for this like one targeted audience. It's just fascinating how this is still in operation.
Yeah, like for instance, Flaming Hot came out recently. On the Cheetos, you know, that's universal. We've been putting hot sauce for years. Different people putting hot sauce on Cheetos. That's just Mexicans,
You said it's universal. You said it's universal.
Universal, you know.
But I think, and I like the fact that you brought up kind of like film and going back and looking at this. It really is interesting that, a black film or a black movie generally is one that the audience, if they physically see someone with the phenotype of dark skin, or whatever, then that's kind of the film that it is, when it may not have anything to do with that. And I think of like, Think Like a Man or The Best Man Holiday,
All right.
and those movies were just about friends coming back
Right.
together for
Relationships.
marriage and
Yep.
relationships.
Right.
And although the characters happen to be people of color, they're labeled black films, or they're labeled, multi-ethnic films based on that, when that's really not what the story is. But it is interesting that when you look at the Titanic, which and if you look at the history and whatever, there were some families of color that were actually on the Titanic. They were in steerage, so they didn't make it out. But they were there, but you don't necessarily hear their stories. But it's interesting that when you look at a film like that, or Oppenheimer, or even, you know, um, 50 First Dates, or anything that Adam Sandler, or anything that Gwyneth Paltrow or whatever, those films aren't labeled white films, you know classically. They're not labeled white films. So I think, yes, there's that differentiation of, again, kind of that dynamic and dichotomy of what's right versus we got to call something other,
Yeah.
you know, and then we look at it from a capitalist standpoint, because most black films by Hollywood standard was always said they don't make black films, don't make movies. I mean, they don't make
Don't make
money,
money.
they don't sell overseas, they don't do whatever.
But,
And
but
yeah,
okay, real quick. But you know what? One of the reasons why, again, we talking about structural issues.
mhm,
First of all, typically black movies suffer from smaller production budgets.
mhm,
So, I mean, I don't blame a kid who, after living in Baltimore, Maryland all week long, on Friday night says, I want to see some dinosaurs. I don't blame the young man. I mean, who wants to see a gritty documentary, about the streets? I mean, I've been living it all week, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I mean, this idea, I want escapism. I want some
yeah,
fantasy. I want to see some people in outer space. I want to
mhm,
see people time traveling. I mean, I get it. But like you said, so smaller production budgets means smaller
mhm,
imaginations, right? I mean, we're just sitting around the dinner table. Would you say soul food? We're sitting around the dinner table. We're just talking. We're having. You don't have the computer graphics. You don't have the
yeah,
aliens. You don't have the explosions, right? We have a smaller production budget, so just aesthetically, it may not appeal to as many people, right?
mhm,
Even though the themes you talk about are still redeeming and still can translate to numerous people. I mean, it's just kind of like you have to be in the mood for it, type deal, right?
yeah,
And then secondly, the black movies are typically shown on fewer theaters, right?
mhm,
So mathematically, they're not designed to compete with,
mhm,
say, the Avengers Endgames, that
mhm,
are shown on, nearly 6,000 theaters. I
yeah,
mean, again, like what planet were you on if you had, I mean, not to say that you saw it, but if you hadn't heard about this movie Frozen, right? I mean, if you haven't heard about this movie Frozen, I don't know what I don't know what you were doing. Well, I mean,
mhm,
not to say that you saw it, but if you haven't
yeah,
heard about it, right? Just in terms of it just permeates the larger culture, right? Because so many people see it and blah blah blah. And again, I mean, it's just one of those deals where structurally, right? This is what we're
mhm,
talking about. Structurally, there's still some issues that we have yet to really address head on after all these years. It's still 2024. And look at the Academy Awards that just happened, right? I mean, did we really break any new ground? Did we really break any new barriers? Maybe it's the subject for another conversation.
No, no, well, I think if it goes back into the idea of reflecting culture, heritage, and bringing into the attention, the celebration of excellence that we would talk about, um, then I think that whether it's the Academy Awards or whether it's my area, you and I both love film, and when we look at film and the history and the structure of it, it's always been made to benefit one group at the behest of another. And the only thing that I would say is that one of the interesting things when I was doing my research on black film, from 2000 to 2018, all the black films they did very well at the box office, made all their money, except for Red Tails, which I always say was a horrible film. But when you stack them up compared to some of the bigger white films, which, and mind you, I'm calling them white films because they have predominantly white people in it, but they're generally considered a Hollywood film. They don't give that nomenclature. They didn't do as well. But yet those actors got to continually repeat those films and that structure because it said, we like you because you're the girl next door. We like you because you're funny. We like you because of whatever. And so we're going to just put you in and let you be. Whereas I think when it comes to people of color, no, we want to see you in specific ways. And so I do think that, one of the breakouts then is why Black Panther was so popular, and did so well compared to other films. But I think that if we bring it back to the conversation of just looking at the structure and the formation, then institutionally, white has always been given a preference, and so how do we have those conversations when I think we all know that to be the case? How do we have those conversations so that if you're going to accurately portray something, you then got to talk about, you limit resources in one area so that you can have more resources in the other, and therefore by nature they probably would be better, And I put that in quotes because that doesn't always be the case. But you know what I'm saying? But if I give you all the toys and the rest of us have none, then and we can make games out of shit, out of nothing. That's more to us and our nature, whereas you're sitting over there with all the toys. And the analogy just is, I think that we're looking at a majority and a structure that has always favored this one group. And now I think that group is really having to start deciphering what that meant. And I think the beauty of it is that they have us and other people like us that will sit there and question and challenge, what do they mean and how far that should go.
Wow. I hate to end this. It's been a joy um, to listen and witness this. Um, in our final just a few 2 or 3 minutes, the final question would be then, and I want to pose this to you individually. So, Dr. Moreno, are we doing an American White Heritage History Month in Flagstaff, yay or nay?
No, but we'll listen to them what they want to do.
Dr. Tees, what are we doing?
I'm gonna join my brother and say I don't think so.
Okay. Dr. G, what say you?
Well, what are we doing every other month that's not called February? I'm confused. I'm confused.
Hey, and we have these dialogues so that we can come together and talk about it, and we do this to educate and to inform and to give people something to think about. And so tonight, as we prepare to end this barbershop talk, and we're definitely going to come back with the part two, because I'd like to get some community members who made that request on here and to bring you all back. This is just simply to set the record straight, to give people something to think about. And this isn't about our truth or their truth. This is about the truth. And that is what the Lived Black Experience Project is about. I thank you, awesome gentlemen, you brainiac humans, for being here this evening. We thank our viewers. And in the end, I always like to say, and we say, go in grace.
Thank you.
Thank you.